Hello, art historians. Today we are back with sorry about that. Today we're back with our study of early Europe, and we're currently in the early and late medieval period. And so what we're going to study today is the Lindisfarne Gospel. So you have three images. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they are. So when we see the word Gospels in a text like this, in an art piece like this, what we're looking at are the Gospel books of the New Testament. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what typically happened was in cathedrals, churches, things like that. At this time period, there would be a special book that would have only those four books in it. There would be a special manuscript written by hand with only those four books in it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Because there's a part in the Catholic Mass where you read the Old Testament and then some New Testament stuff, but then there's the most important reading comes from one of the four books of the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so when we see the word Gospels there, what we're talking about is that book that would have held just those four chapters. So we're looking at it's early medieval, and you see that it says Hiberno-Saxon. And what Hiberno-Saxon is it is sort of a combination of like Mediterranean cultures, the Anglo-Saxon culture, and Celts. And so where this was taking place is in Northumberland, which is just off the coast of Northumberland, which is at the line between sort of where England turns to Scotland. So it's just off the coast of England and Scotland. In 621, the king sends one of his messengers to turn the pagans in this area into Christians. And so what you're dealing with here is an early text whose purpose is to increase the number of Christians in the British Isles. And so this is after the Romans were in charge of the British Isles. The British Isles are becoming more independent. They're trying to figure out like exactly what they're going to be. There were Vikings, there were Viking raids, there were Celts, there were Normans, there was all kinds of chaos. It all sort of comes together and finally sort of shakes itself out around 1066 with the Norman invasion, but we'll come to that later. So what you're looking at with this illuminated manuscript is you're looking at a book that would have been encased in a beautiful, fine leather cover. It would have had what is called a treasure binding. And so that fine leather cover would have then had jewels and things attached to it. The binding was lost during the Viking raids. So, 900, 1,000, somewhere in there. The replacement cover was crafted for it in 1852 based on what they think it might have looked like. So the replacement cover is not actually one of your images because we don't really know for sure what it looked like. This is the most complete text of the Gospels that we have from this time period, which is really important. And it is written in Latin. But what's interesting is it's written in Latin, but there are notes between the lines. Some of it's translation from the Latin. Some of it is just notes for like pronunciation. Some of it is notes about what is happening in the story. But it's in English or the English of the time. What's interesting is it is considered the oldest translation of the Bible into English. So Saint Jerome, not a fan of this. Again, called it he doesn't like all the frilly ridiculousness, but and he was not a big fan of things being written in English either. So Lindisfarne, like I said, which is off the coast of Scotland and England, is called the Holy Island, and that's because pretty much the only thing on it was the monastery where the monks came to write texts. Before I keep going, I'm going to say that I'm going to give you some background to what you're looking at. You can hear that I have a little bit of a cold, so I have to stop every once in a while, take a drink. My throat hurts a little bit. So what we see here is some of the patterns that you'll see are pre-Christian patterns. You'll see a lot of Celtic patterns that the Celts would have used before they were Christianized. You're going to see a bunch of zoomorphic patterns. There's birds and dogs and cats, lots of different animals. This is considered a quote I pulled, which I didn't source, which is terrible. I used to be an English teacher. I should do that. The quote I pulled said that archaeologists consider this the first and greatest masterpiece of medieval book painting. This is considered the big deal. The colors that were used were from animal and mineral sources. So, like we talked about with the some of the other things that we saw, the red in some of the writings were made from little tiny bugs that lived on animals. We see a lot of interesting animal and plant uses for making colors, but we also know that this book contains some colors that would have been made by importing things from as far away as the Himalayas and Afghanistan. So this is a huge undertaking, this book. Why just the Gospels? Because the Gospels are considered to be the books where the teachings of Christ in his words. The other books that come after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the other books of the New Testament that come after those, tell about Christ's life as the people who wrote them remember it. The four Gospels are have the words of Christ in them. So that's why they're considered a really important text for Christians. This would have been, like I said, hauled out for ceremonial purposes during the Mass when the gospel was read, but also to show to people, to try to convince them to convert. As this was created, we begin to enter into that period of that a lot of us learned about when we were in middle school, that Middle Ages period where we have the scriptorium, where the monks just sit and they just copy books all day long, and there's a monk that's in charge of writing the text, there's a monk that's in charge of illustrating the text, and there's a monk that's in charge of the pages that look like this, which is called a cross carpet page. There's a monk that's in charge of the portrait page, which we'll look at in a minute. So, this is sort of a big deal here at Lindisfarne. And people would come to Lindisfarne as a pilgrimage site to thank the monks for the work that they were doing and to visit the Holy Island. And you're looking at a book that was made on vellum, which is either sheep skin or calf skin. They would have written with quills, so usually feather quills, sometimes reed pens, like a reed that grows by the water. They could cut that down and write with that. And the colors are interesting. Some of the black that you use would have been made from the soot from fires. The glue was actually made from fish, which is odd. The binding for the pigments is actually egg white, and using egg whites and egg yolks for binding is something that happens starting around here and goes for thousands of years. Not thousands, but 1,000 years. Yeah, pretty much 1,000 years. And it's interesting when you think about how this book would have been created, because what the monks would do is they would have this big piece of wood that would then be covered with wax, and they would draw out the pattern in the wax. so that they would have a basic rough outline. And then what they could do is if they made a mistake, they could just heat it and like melt that wax a little bit and try again. So that when they got the finished piece in wax, they could then go sort of over top of it, almost like lay paper down on top and sort of, it's like a rough draft, basically. What was cool about the wax tablet is it could be used more than once. So, if I were a monk and I was drawing this, I would draw my rough draft of what all my scrolls and things would look like on my wax tablet. And then I would pass my wax tablet to the monk that would actually draw this on the page. And then he would pass that to the monk that would put the color on. And then once that was done, the wax tablet would be like melted again and get a fresh coat of wax on top of it, and it could be reused to do the next page. And in calculating the creation of this book, we're looking at about 130 to 150 calfskins needing to be used to create this. So this was a huge undertaking. So the page that you're looking at right now, we're going to start now with the description of this page. The page you're looking at right now is called a cross carpet page. Okay. And that sentence makes sense. It has a cross in it and it looks like a carpet, like a fancy carpet that you would put on your floor. When you look at it, it is kind of like, I'm going to go back one second. It's kind of like the cloisonne from our Merovingian looped fibulae, but transferred to paper. And so what is interesting here is that we've talked about this when we did, we talked about this when we did the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus, about the idea that there is horror vacui, HORROR, and then vacui, VACUI or CUII. And that means anything that's completely covered in imagery. And so that counts for sculptures like the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus. It also counts for things like this, for things that are in print. When we look at this, you're going to see that there are lots of these S shapes, and you're looking at dogs and birds and snakes. They're all just animals. It's all zoomorphic. It's symmetrical when you look at it. There's perfectly the same on one side as the other. And the colors are on a mostly black background. You can see that there's a lot of black back there. So we started with a black background and then painted over top of it, and it gives emphasis and detail. And what you see here is are a lot of these swirls that are here. Those are Celtic images. The Celts, those guys that you see them in all the movies. They have all the crazy outfits and things like that. And so, I'm so sorry, kilts and things like we have this idea of what Celts are, and are. I could go into like hours long discussion of what Celts actually are. But this is Celtic design, pagan design. Okay. Then we move on to this is just an explanation of who wrote it. But important, your theme here is calligraphy, which is writing by hand, manuscripts, books that were written by hand. And so, just that's all you needed to know. But I love this page because look at the birds and the berries. And this is a really great page because it gives you really the close-up of what some of these details look like. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there we go, the four evangelists. And then this is the St. Luke incipit page. And incipit means the beginning, right? It's the opening words of the book of Luke. And we always start in an illuminated manuscript. We always start with, a huge initial letter here, right? And then the first few words. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like the first sentence maybe. And this zoom in here is this what you see here. This is why I use this. It's a really amazing reproduction. So you can see that inside these little whirly things here, they're animal heads, bird beaks, these look like horses, and these look a little bit like birds and a little bit like fish. And then you come down here, and that's a bird, I'm sorry, a cat or a dog, and that's a bird. So all along this whole thing are all these really beautiful, intricate designs that would have taken years. And so there's lots of beautiful imagery here, but what you can see is here's the Latin, and then you can see there's a little bit of text right above the Latin. That's where it's translated into English, and not our English. This English. This is what English would have looked like at the time. So that's why I bring that in here. So this is what English. So when you look at it and you're like, I can't read that. It's not our English. It's Old English. And so, Middle Ages English. And so that is what you see here. You see the Latin and you see the English translation. We just are looking here. What are we looking here on this particular page for? We're looking at the idea that there's an initial opening letter, and that the first page, the first sentence is just on this one page, the incipit page, the beginning page, the opening words page. And so that is what the purpose of this page is, okay? And then your last image is this page. So each gospel would have an opening cross carpet page. So this is the one for Matthew, but Mark, Luke, and John would have had an opening cross carpet page at the beginning. And then after their cross carpet page, there would be their incipit page. And then there would also be a page about a portrait of the writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And so what you're looking at here is you're looking at the imagery of St. Luke, who is often identified as the calf. That's his animal. St. Mark is the lion. Matthew, Mark. I just had a brain hiccup. I'll remember them in a minute. But Luke is the calf, and Mark is the lion, and John is an angel, and I feel bad, but I can't remember what Matthew is. So Luke is, and this says Hagios Luke, the Holy Luke, and that's what we're seeing here. And we see that he has his halo because he is a saint, and here he is, here he is in animal form as the sacrificial lamb. And so here you see him with his feet up, writing, and his legs are a little bit crossed, and he's writing on his scroll. He has a beard, and that is because St. Luke was really, really young. And so they give him the beard to try to sort of underscore his importance by underscoring like his age, like they're attempting to give him, wisdom. Don't not listen to him just because he's young. And so here you see the act of St. Luke writing his gospel. And so that's what we're looking at here. Is the Lindisfarne Gospels. You may have heard about the Book of Kells. That is the other famous illuminated manuscript of the time. All right, let's go to our next image. This is in early Europe, probably my favorite image. And part of that is because it is so unlike everything else that we see at this time period. It is so different from what we have looked at before. So this is the Rottgen Pietà, and the word Pietà is simply a painting or sculpture of Christ in the lap of the Virgin Mary, and almost always the crucified Christ in the lap of the Virgin Mary. When we paint this scene, we often call it a lamentation because Mary is lamenting, sad about the death of her child. When we put it in sculpture, it's usually called a Pietà. So that's the difference in that language used there. what we call it. This is painted wood, and this is part of what they call the Passion narrative, the story of the Passion of Christ, which goes from the where he prays in the garden, and he knows, well, actually from the Last Supper, through his death on the cross. And it tracks sort of like the important pieces along the way from basically from the time that Christ knows he's going to be crucified through his death. And so this is the part after he's died and he's taken down off the cross and he is placed in the hands of his mother. What's interesting about this is when we think about this piece, this is late medieval Europe. Okay, so we're coming up at the end here of the late period. When we think about this piece, we have to think about the idea that most of our depictions of the Virgin Mary have her looking young and beautiful and at peace, and Christ looks a little bit like he's asleep, and the images are usually quite peaceful. This one is not peaceful at all, at all. And this plays into what happens in the late medieval period, which is sort of this sense of mysticism, like this idea of connecting to your emotions and the deep like feelings that are attached to your faith. And so in this, we see what is really a devastating and gruesome, I mean, really gruesome image of the Virgin Mary holding the body of the dead Christ. And really, I haven't shown you even the like up close places first. Let me talk about it first. Really, this piece is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the look on Mary's face, which I will close up in a second. Two, the very clear imagery of a suffering Christ, of a Christ whose body has been really beaten and tortured. Three, the fact that it's wood it's unusual that it has lasted and it is in such good condition. There are definitely wormholes in it. There's definitely signs of rot, of worms having gotten to it, animals having gotten to it, but the majority of the paint is intact, and the statue itself is in really good shape, which is unusual. This was created by monks in a Franciscan order, and the Franciscan monks have a tendency in their faith to focus on the humanity of Christ, not so much the divinity of Christ, but the humanity of Christ. They focus on that, like when he was alive and how he was human. And that is clear here in this depiction of his crucified body, because it shows that he was human and he could bleed and he could suffer and he could die. It's starting to show a change in the medieval period, at the end of the medieval period. Like I said, that sense of mysticism, that sense of feeling your religion. We move as a church into less about the learning of it, because remember, early on, 700, it had only been legal for 400 years. That's not a long time. By 1300, we don't feel like we need to necessarily learn about what the history is or figure out what our story is going to be. We figure out as a church, we figure out that this is our story. And now that we know our story, how does our story make us feel? And that's what happens in the late medieval period. And so the emphasis here is very much on the human. And the reason for that is the emphasis on feeling and the emphasis on the human allows the viewer to look at the picture or to look at the statue and make a connection with, in this piece, Christ and Mary, and in some of the other pieces, God, and in some of the other pieces, the saints. The sort of mysticism allows the viewer to look at the piece and go, wow, look, we can connect to that person. I can connect to Mary on an emotional level. And that is something that happens at the near the end of the medieval period that really becomes a big deal as we move into some of the other art historical periods, particularly a period that is coming in a long time called the Baroque. And when we move into the Baroque period, and that's, the late early 1600s, when we get to the Baroque period, that's all about feeling emotions. But this is sort of the beginning of that. And so let's start with a Pietà is usually just the two of them. That's sort of the one difference between a lamentation and a Pietà. A lamentation often has other people with it. Pietà is usually just the two. So I'm going to go to the next one where we're going to zoom in on various pieces and talk about this. All right. So I want to talk first about her face. Let's look at Mary's face. Let's look at her face here. Let's look at her face here. Mary, in most pictures and sculptures of the Pietà, of the Lamentation, Mary's face is at peace. She looks at rest. She looks serene. She looks calm. This is not that. This is very much not that. This is a woman who is devastated by the loss of her son and angry. And why this is a big deal is Christian tradition teaches that Mary knew from the beginning that she would have the Son of God and that he would die. And so a lot of the illustrations of Mary paint her as being like, okay, well, I knew this was going to happen and I knew it from the beginning and so did he, and this was going to happen. This is very different. This is the humanity of Mary. She may have known it was coming. He may have known it was coming. He may have been okay with it, but this is a woman who is devastated by the loss of her child. Now, think about that it's the 1300s. Think about, plagues and illness and stuff like that. That's what's here. That's what you see here. This is a woman who has lost her child and is devastated by it. And so that's the first big deal about the Rottgen Pietà is Mary. Then you look at the body of Christ, and you're like, holy moly, because it is horrific. So you can see here the place where he was crucified, right? So we always see the hands and the nail holes in his hands and the nail holes in his feet. We always see those. And then to make sure that he was dead, a Roman soldier stabbed him with a spear. And so we usually see this hole as well. And so why that is important is that looks bloody. Look at all the drips of blood. I mean, you can actually see where the skin is torn and the blood is dripping out of him. Look at his rib cage there, where he looks emaciated. He looks sciencey word, exsanguinated, where he's been emptied of his blood. I mean, he has bled so much. Look at the blood that is painted on his head, dripping down his neck. The thorns on his crown of thorns were actually sharp. They were sharpened to a point. Some of them have broken off, but some of them are still fairly sharp. So this was meant to be felt. This was meant to be emotional. This was meant to make you say, wow, this is a big deal, because this is the moment in Christianity where at the time a big focus was on the idea that Christ sacrificed himself for the world. And so in order to feel the passion of their religion, early Christians focused on that sacrifice. And so that is what this piece is. This piece is reminding you of the sacrifice that Christ made. And remember, when I say you, I mean the person looking, the viewer of the time, reminding you of the sacrifice that Christ made, and reminding you that you should be worshiping Christ because look at what he did for you. And so this is a really powerful piece. It is gruesome. He has gaping wounds. There is all this blood. There's actually a term for when the blood looks like drops like this. There's a term in art where it's called, where it's made to look 3D, whether it's in paint or actual sculpture. And the term is the mystical vineyard. Like wine is made from grapes, and this is like he talks about his this is my blood given up for you, and the transubstantiation, like I talked about, of wine into blood. This is called the mystical vineyard, because here we see his blood, which will become in the Mass wine. We're going to look at some other images later of the crucifixion and the passion and stuff like that. But keep this one in mind. This one is outside of the norm that we usually see. And it is because we're beginning to see the idea that religion is meant to be very powerfully emotional. And that is why your theme here is suffering. And that is what this is. Okay. All right, next one. All right. The Golden Haggadah. You have 3 images, and you need to be able to see the difference between them. And so they're labeled for you. And let's talk about what a Haggadah is, and then we'll talk about like what pages we're looking at. So this is where sometimes people think that I'm teaching a religion class. I'm not, but sometimes in teaching art, you have to teach a little bit of religion. So this is when I go, okay, story time. And you will find that I will call it story time, whether it is I'm talking about the Egyptian story, I'm talking about the Christian story, I'm talking about the Muslim story. I just call it story time because in here, religious texts are a background for what the art looks like. And so you cannot understand some of the works of art if you don't understand the religion behind them. So story time. So in the book of Exodus, many people know the story. This is when the Jews are being held in Egypt by the Pharaoh against their will. And the Israelites, that's what we called them. Textually, that's what they're called at that point. They're called the Israelites. They're not often referred to as the Jews yet. That's a later term that we use. But the Israelites are being held captive by the Pharaoh and made to be slaves. And when that happens, there are lots of things that are, talked about. And at some point they kill the children of Jewish people and the boys of Jewish people. And a woman has an infant, and she's afraid that her infant is going to be killed by the Egyptians. So she puts him in a little basket and sends him down the river. And he goes down the river, and the basket is found by the daughter of the Pharaoh. And she raises this baby that she finds. And eventually this baby finds out that he was actually born from Jews, from Israelites. And he goes to find his family. And that baby in the basket is Moses, the Red Sea Moses. We're getting to the Red Sea. Okay, so Moses is contacted by God. And God says, look, your job is to go and get the Israelites out of slavery where the Pharaoh is. And Moses says, like, how am I going to do that? And God says, we're gonna send some issues. And so Moses goes to the Pharaoh and he says, you need to let the Jews go. And the Pharaoh says no. And Moses says, look, you got to let them go or else. And the Pharaoh says, or else what? And Moses says, because if you don't, like, our Lord is going to send bad things to you. And the Pharaoh says, get out of here. And so there are all these plagues that come. The rivers turn to blood, and the sun is covered. And so what you see here are 4 of the plagues. There are 10. You only see 4 here. Well, actually 5, because there's one in this top corner. So this top corner here is the plagues of boils, like where you get like horrific like sores that like if you burn yourself and you get like that bubble that pops up, that like boils. Okay. So like blisters. Yeah. So that's boils on people, and also lice. That's what you're looking at. Those little dots, lice and gross, nasty things. Okay. So that's that one. This is the plague of frogs. There's just frogs everywhere. Frogs everywhere. They come out of the water. They're in all the houses. They eat all the food. And then, and there's flies. That's one of them. And there's locusts that come in and eat all the crops. I mean, it's crazy. So this one is like literally wild animals come in and attack the Egyptians. And after each one of these plagues, Moses goes in and is like, you got to let my people go. And the Pharaoh says, no, got to let my people go. Boils, flies, lice, locusts, wild animals, frogs, rivers turn to blood, the sun is covered. Then we get the livestock, all their livestock die. And so like now we don't have crops because the frogs and the locusts and everything killed our crops. And now our livestock is dead and we're being attacked by wild animals. And we're overrun by frogs and locusts and flies and lice. And he keeps coming, and the Pharaoh keeps saying no. And so what ends up happening in this story is that, and this Golden Haggadah is the book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus. And Exodus means like to leave, right? So how do we get to the point where they go to leave? Well, that brings us to our second picture. Oops. Whoa. Okay. Our second picture is what is called the preparation for Passover. Because what's happening here is Moses tells the Pharaoh for the last time, this one's going to be really bad. Like you really gotta listen. And the Pharaoh says no. And so Moses tells all of the Israelites, the Jews, this is what you gotta do. You gotta take some blood from a lamb, and you gotta put it above your doorway. Okay, you gotta paint it above your doorway. You gotta clean your house. You got to take away all the bread because we're going to be leaving, and you're not going to have time for bread to rise. So you're going to have to make what is basically matzah, non-leavened bread. You're going to have to get all the regular bread out, and you're going to have to get this non-leavened bread because we don't have time to wait for bread to rise. That's what leaven means. We don't have time to wait, and that's why matzah crackers are like so thin. It's because they don't have time to rise. So what are we looking at? Preparation for Passover. I should probably talk about that too. So you got to clean your house. You got to slaughter the lamb. You got to get your stuff together. So what we see here is the master of the house, the husband, the whatever, and they would have been multi-generational houses. So the master of the house is distributing matzah and haroset, which is like apples and honey and stuff like that. Food that can travel well. He's distributing this, okay? This is Moses' sister, Miriam, and she is also helping with the getting rid of the bread and getting out the matzah, okay? Here we have the sheep being slaughtered. And the man here is purifying the utensils so that they can slaughter the sheep the correct way. And food that's slaughtered correctly in Judaism is called kosher. So here we're making kosher lamb. And then in this one, the house is being cleaned. The woman is doing a search to clean on the floor, and the man is doing a search to make sure there's no more leavened bread, that we're not taking anything with us that we can't move. So this comes back to this idea of Passover. This is all how do we get to Passover? Because you take the blood of the lamb and you paint it on your door, and that's when we get into what the last plague is. The last plague, okay, is the angel of death goes through Egypt and kills the firstborn son in every house that doesn't have blood painted over the doorway. And that is why it's called Passover. If you have blood painted above your doorway, then the angel of death will pass over your house and go to the next house. And so what you're looking at is here you see the Pharaoh saying, get out. Okay, go, because one of the people that is killed in the Passover is the son of the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's firstborn son is killed by the angel of death, and he's so distraught. He says, "Get out, go, just leave." And so over here you see pictures of what that looks like. You see a mother mourning the death of her baby. You see another mother mourning the death of her firstborn child that is older. Here's the angel of death. And here you see them taking the child to be buried. So the angel of death comes. The Pharaoh's like, get out. Oh, I should probably talk about how you read this. I forgot to do that. So this is actually the one where it is the most important. Where you read it first. You read top to bottom, right to left. So here the angel of death comes. Here are all the dead babies. Get out, go. Okay. Then the Pharaoh decides that he needs to get an army together. And the Pharaoh and his Egyptian army start riding out to catch the Israelites. And notice that all of the soldiers look like they're medieval knights, because you draw what you know, right? So the Pharaoh changes his mind. He sends them away because he's so angry. And the Israelites are like, woohoo! And the Pharaoh changes his mind and says, go get them and kill them. And he sends his army to go get them. And then this is that famous story of Moses parting the Red Sea. He parts the Red Sea. They walk through. And when all of the Israelites have gotten through the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh's army is still in that opened up Red Sea, the Red Sea covers back up, and they all die. So that is what you are looking at, the story. But that doesn't tell you what this book is. And that is why sometimes kids are like, is this religion class or art class? Well, you have to know what the story is, and then I can tell you what the book is. Okay, so this book is called The Golden Haggadah. And a Haggadah, the word Haggadah, means narration in Hebrew, which is the language that Jews speak. And why it is called narration is the Haggadah is the book that is read every year at the Seder dinner. And the Seder dinner is the Passover dinner, okay? And every year, Jews get together for Seder at Passover, and they read about the story of Moses and the Exodus. And it's important because it tells the story. And you can buy these at Passover time. You can buy them in the grocery store. They sell them in the grocery store. They sell them lots of places. And what its job is that it is read each Seder at dinner. And it tells the story of the Exodus. And then as you are reading the prayers and the readings and all that stuff, you're working your way through the Haggadah and your meal. And you're telling the story of the Exodus, the escape of the Israelites from Egypt, because that was one of the things that God said the Israelites had to do once they were free, is they had to tell the story. And so the Haggadah is a way to do that, okay? The second commandment says that there can be no graven images. So how do we get away with this? All of this, like gold, and it would have been incredibly expensive. I mean, this is considered the most beautiful Haggadah that exists in the world. It's actually unlikely that it was ever actually used at a meal because there's no stains on it. It's in great condition. There doesn't appear to be any food on it. And the Haggadah, it would be open and read. If you've ever been to a Seder, often there's a Haggadah now for each person at the table so that you can read your part and stuff like that. And so this book shows that the patron was very wealthy. This book helps to fulfill the requirement that Jews had to continue to tell the story of their freedom from Egypt. It has 56 of these little miniature pictures with the gold background, which is why it's called the Golden Haggadah. What you're looking at is they get away with this not graven images, because that's really a big thing. No graven images. So how do we get away with this? Because this is very clearly like embossed and like that. Because it's educational. You can get away with graven images if it's educational. And that is what this book is. It's meant to be seen as educational. It tells the story of the Exodus. And so there's, whole parts where there are whole parts where in the Golden Haggadah, a child or the youngest person at the table is supposed to ask, why is this night different? And once the child asks that, the Haggadah comes out and you begin to read the story. Now, pay attention to the fact that all of the clothing and decoration is all from the Gothic era, okay? So it's really important that we pay attention to the fact that this is super late medieval sliding into Gothic. Okay. We are looking at how it is influenced by Christian art at the time. While this is Jewish art, it is influenced by Christian art. Jews do not usually have images of people in their temples. They definitely don't now. They did then, but rarely. And they didn't do a lot of illustrated texts. So actually, all of the illustrations here were done by Christians. The only thing that would have been done by the Jewish scholars would be the writing of the text. The Christians did all of the drawings and painting. It's very similar to a French manuscripts. It's very similar to French manuscripts of the time. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that this is Spanish. We forget sometimes that Spain had a large Jewish population. And so this is really, really beautiful and similar to many of the Gothic texts that we were seeing, that we'll start seeing very soon in other parts of the country. In other parts of Europe. And so that is sort of the end of late medieval Spain. And when I see you next time, we will do another set of images that will include story time, which is we will do Islam. And we'll talk about sort of some of the basics of Islam. I'll see you next time. Have a good one, and